All right, we are moving things along. Clayton Whitson will come out at 9:30 because we're inviting Patrick Malayter. Sometimes I get the Tuesdays and the weeks mixed up, but we'll give him points for being punctual, actually. Patrick Malayter, who is running for Congress, the 5th Congressional District, currently held by Victoria Spartz, who has announced she won't run again, although she's leaving that door slightly open in recent interviews, but we'll assume she's not going to run again, which I'm sure.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Patrick Malayter, who's a longtime CPA, who's no longer practicing, right, as an accountant.
Yeah, I retired from the business here probably about 10 years ago. Accounting firms have mandatory retirements.
Oh,
for partners.
really?
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense, right? It's
Yeah. You need to have younger people coming up and taking over, otherwise you'll lose all your clients.
So you can count well enough to know that we have about a $34 trillion debt.
Absolutely.
And we spend almost $1 trillion a year on interest on the debt. We're getting close.
Absolutely.
Which means we can't use that for anything else. So what are your thoughts on the math, first of all, as an accountant?
Well, again, that's one of the key reasons why I'm running, using term limits. So, again, you look back 20 years ago when President Clinton left office, we were generating $400 billion a year in surpluses. They actually expected the national debt, the amount that could actually be paid off, to be paid off by 2006.
At that time.
Yeah. Well, the Treasury Secretary came out and said that. So, what ended up happening, again, I was making a good income in 2001 when President Bush got elected, and we get this big tax cut. I wasn't asking for
01 and 03, if I recall.
You're spot on, yeah. So I'm making a lot of money, and I was pissed about
the debt.
Well, because I ran a national tax practice, and I could tell you that $400 billion a year surplus was going to turn into a huge deficit, which it did. In 1 year, there was a $650 billion turnaround just due to that.
Because of spending, I'm guessing. I mean,
well, no,
we never cut.
You kneecapped your revenue with the tax cut, and then we ended up going into wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Well, but past tax cuts, Kennedy, which LBJ signed, and Reagan, and even Trump. I mean, revenues actually went up, but spending outpaced revenues.
Well, again, with this particular tax cut. Again,
not so much.
My job was to watch federal legislation.
Right, yeah.
And I knew, my partners are high-fiving each other, said, yeah, big tax cut.
I've heard people argue that those Bush 2 tax cuts led to about $700 billion more in revenue, but you don't buy that. You were an accountant, so you were there.
I ran a national tax practice.
Yeah. So you knew.
Yeah, I could tell.
So the growth didn't come from those tax cuts.
No, if you think back at the start of 2000 or so, I mean, we had a little bit of a recession there as well.
Right.
But yes, we had spending and so forth. But some of these tax cuts, they benefited mostly people like me.
Because half the people don't really pay a net income tax federally.
Yeah, I mean, they pay, Social Security, things like
payroll,
that. Yeah,
payroll taxes.
Right.
So you really aren't a supply sider then?
No, I mean, probably the ultimate supply sider is Art Laffer that's out there, and I've seen him speak multiple times through the years at conferences. I don't believe in that.
So you're pay as you go guy.
Well, I am, and in the tax area, the only thing I'm a proponent of here right now, I'm not a proponent of changing the rates or individual deductions. There are some really greasy loopholes out there that I mean, the tax code. The tax code is 8,000 pages long.
Right.
The rules that interpret them are 24,000 pages long, and then there's literally millions of pages of court cases, IRS interpretations, you name it. And when you think about it, who benefits when something's complex? Wealthy people that can pay somebody $800, $1,000, $1,500 an hour to figure out where the greasy spots are.
Well, and so what would you change? What are the top three?
In terms of the tax law?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. One is carried interest. So, for example, the last practice I built in public accounting was serving private equity firms. Do you know that a private equity guy that makes $5 million a year is actually paying a lower tax rate than a single person making $60,000 a year? A single person making a little over $60,000 is at a 22% marginal rate, whereas with this carried interest item, they're paying a 20% rate.
Maybe briefly explain that concept.
So basically, here's what it is. You know, when a private equity guy is out there and he sells a business, making it real simple, roughly speaking, 20% of the profit on that investment goes to the private equity person. He's not putting cash in on the deal. It's almost like a bonus. You're getting a 20% bonus based on the appreciation of the business that you bought.
Right.
So that gets taxed at 20%, whereas it's really compensation for services when you look at it. But if you're a working person at the GM plant,
paid on payroll, you'll pay a higher rate.
Well, ignore the payroll. Just looking at the income tax rate, they are basically paying a higher income tax rate of 22% versus the private equity.
But that's on salary. That's on payroll, right?
It's on their payroll. Yeah. And this is essentially the same thing. It's a bonus.
Oh, a bonus, yeah.
Yeah.
So you would tax that at what rate?
Just the regular income tax rate, yeah.
Well, I mean, Warren Buffett would always say that his secretary paid a higher rate than he did because he paid on capital gains.
Yeah.
Bill Gates, they all do that, and they put a lot in charitable foundations.
Right. But, you know, the last time they looked at changing that law was probably about, 3 or 4 years ago. Do you know who stuck in her stilettos to make sure it didn't happen?
Refresh me.
The senator from Arizona, Kirsten.
Kirsten
Sinema. Thank you.
A Democrat who often went the other way.
Now, why would somebody do that? Well, you end up looking at where she got her cut. She got $2 million from the private equity.
Right, yeah.
Of course.
Well, Ronald Reagan didn't believe in that gap. He wanted everybody to pay 28% at one point.
Yeah. No, I was a young kid in the business.
He would talk about truck drivers paying a higher rate than the super rich. I mean, Reagan and David Stockman, his budget director, campaigned and lobbied for a 28% rate for everybody at that point.
Yeah, well,
I think
became law.
Because the income tax rate, the marginal rate, I think in Reagan, it went from 70 to 28 briefly, back to 33, and now it's at 39 now.
Yeah, no, I was actually in the business back in those days. Yeah. So, they had a capped rate on salary and income of 50% at the time. But, it could go up to 70. The only difference back then was there were all these kinds of write-offs.
Well, 70 before they did the reform of 86. That's what really.
81 was the one where they
those across the board, yeah.
Yeah,
but they changed the code in 86.
Correct.
They went from 17 brackets to 3.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't mean to be a geek. You know more than I on this stuff, but I do remember watching C-SPAN. My friends were watching concerts. Patrick Malayter running for Congress. Number to call, by the way. Interesting conversation. I'd love to. Number 378-2086, that's 378-2086, or the backup line, 378-2088. So getting the tax code, getting the economy, and dealing with debt, those are big factors for your running, right?
Absolutely. Like, and public safety is an issue. Higher education's an issue. I mean, when I went to IU, I'm dating myself here, but it cost, basically $720 to pay for tuition at IU.
Late 70s, I'm guessing? Or?
Yeah. In today's money, that's $3,400. Now, what do you think it costs to go to IU?
Oh, $20,000 a year at least.
Well, when you look at just tuition, it's $11,000. So it's like 3.5 times the rate of inflation.
You did it for $700.
And I can tell you where that difference came from.
Go ahead.
Well, some people say, Indiana didn't contribute money. I'm geeky enough. I actually went back into the state budgets. Indiana increased its spending in accordance with inflation. The things that have really driven it is that, one, you've got a lot of tricked out, facilities now that you didn't have back in the day. Secondly, the universities spend a lot of money on just recruiting. They spend $2,000 to $4,000 for each student they bring in. And then the other thing here is you have all these new positions and DEI and others like that where
Yeah.
administration's just
Well, not to mention
skyrocketed.
buildings, auditoriums, all that stuff.
Yeah, tricked out. I call them tricked out facilities.
Well, Ty Butler, I mean, like $70,000 now a
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
Well, and when I went there, 40 plus years ago, tuition was $7,000 a year, which was still high.
Yeah.
And without my golf scholarship, which gave me half tuition, I'd been in real trouble.
But here's the problem with this. I grew up in downtown Gary in a blue-collar family, and in today's world, people like me wouldn't exist because they can't pay. My parents
Couldn't go
wouldn't-
to college.
I couldn't go to college.
We'll come back.
Yeah.
I'm loving this conversation. Patrick Malayter for Congress, 5th Congressional District. Your calls are welcome. This is Mitch in the Morning on Oldies 101.
To phone the show, call 378-2086.
All right, we're joined by Patrick Malayter, who's running for Congress, 5th Congressional District, retired CPA, and talking about money, but now the social issues, which usually drives the Republicans in many cycles. There's been a big debate about abortion. The country, 70% don't believe in total bans, but 70% also don't believe in second and third trimester abortion. So there is a 70% issue on this.
Sure.
But memberships around the country in legislatures are more extreme than the polling because of gerrymandering. So
Right.
it'll never change. What is your approach on this question?
Sure. And it's a good question. A lot of people duck the issue by saying it's a states' rights issue, and it is, So let's look at Indiana, what happened here. Essentially, the Republican Party has a supermajority in the state, and basically 62% of the legislature voted to ban abortion. Mostly white guys, by the way, that enacted that. So here's my view. I feel very similar to the way Bill Clinton did. I think women need to have reproductive rights. But let me step back here for just a quick second, just so you have an appropriate background. My wife and I, we have 5 kids. I believe in the sanctity of life, no question about it. And, as you can very well tell, I am a guy. And I believe that women do deserve a right to choose. So I feel very similar to what Bill Clinton did back 30-some years ago. I think it needs to be safe, meaning that you can go to a facility to have reproductive health care. Legal, meaning, here's how I define legal, up to a point. So I've studied this issue quite a bit.
How many weeks would you?
Probably 12. 12 to 14 is probably where I would go. And again, I've tried to read up a lot on this particular issue, and rare. So here's what I mean by rare. That it doesn't become your primary methodology of having birth control. So, for example, I read an article maybe 2 months ago where Whoopi Goldberg was being interviewed, and she said she had 8 abortions. Well, that's a little crazy.
Really? I never knew that.
Yeah, no,
Shocking.
I was shocked as well. That she had. To me, that's crazy. To have a situation like that. I mean, if you're a poor person, you can go to Planned Parenthood and get birth control for free.
Yeah, 12, 14 weeks would still be more conservative and more restrictive than most of Europe, by the way, which is...
It depends. So you can see countries like Sweden, where, they're probably at about 10 or 11 weeks.
Really?
But here's the thing. If you kind of look at when most abortions take place, they typically take place at about 8 to 10 weeks.
Which would suggest the 6-week bans are so strict that some women don't know they're pregnant at 6 weeks.
That's probably true.
Let's go to the phones. We'll finish this very touchy topic in a moment. Patrick Malayter, running for Congress, 378-2088 is the backup. 378-2086, the first attempt. Good morning. Hello.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
Hello, Robert. How are you?
Terrific.
First of all, I commend the candidate there for wanting to seek public service.
Thank you.
Regardless of whatever party affiliation is, I still commend him for that. Anyway, you're in the 5th District, correct? That
Yes.
That is the soon-to-be vacated seat by Victoria, correct?
Yes.
Victoria Sparks, yes.
Okay. let's look at the demographics of that district. I know that what you just talked about, the pro-life and the pro-choice issue and this and that, but in that particular district, I don't consider that to be, and I'm not down, I do consider it an issue, but in that particular district, with your constituents there, voters, whatever, I'm not sure that's at the top of the menu.
No, it's not. It's not the issue I'm running on. He just asked me about the social implications of it. I'm really
running. Personally, I don't think that any candidate, especially in that district or most districts, let's say here in Indiana, and I'm trying to isolate it here, social issues is not going to make you or make anyone or break any candidate. It's yes, there are a couple social issues out there, but let's look at the big picture of things here. I mean, it's getting control of the country back again, which is in total chaos. Inflation out the roof.
Economic stuff. We're kind of moving along here, but yes, yeah. Robert, so you're talking about economic. Thank you for the call. Go ahead.
So really, I'm running on 4 issues. My first issue is term limiting Congress, because unless you make changes in that respect, nothing will change unless we have changes there. So that is first and foremost. Secondly is higher education reform, doing away with the Obama era federal guaranteed loan program, because again, it's creating a liability of about $1.8 trillion
on college students or
college. Well, it's the guaranteed loan program. So basically, for all intents, it's why and it's how President Biden is trying to go ahead and forgive debt all the time. That's the reason he can try to do it, because it's a federally guaranteed program.
He's lost in court so far.
And again, I grew up in a lower middle class family, so for all intents and purposes, people like me are not having the opportunity to be able to go to school. Now, again, not everybody needs to go to school. Right. There's lots of other opportunities. You can have a terrific life, Not
going to a 4-year college.
Right, absolutely. So, and the third is really legal reform to get public safety. So we have instances in a lot of parts of the state where we have these criminals that, for all intents and purposes, are going through a revolving door. In my view, we need to have, I think the prosecutors need to be civilly legally responsible for those actions, because they're negligent. They're no different than a drunk driver.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, we saw the poor officer here that was shot.
Yeah.
In Elwood, the guy had previously shot at cops in the past.
Yeah, well, and for all intents and purposes, those guys need to be, those guys being the prosecutors, they need to have civil financial liability for that, as well as the county here in Indiana that is allowing that to happen. So that's the third, and then the tax issue. So again, if you're asking me what I'm running on, number one is term limits.
How many terms?
I'm talking about an 8-year total, so 4 terms.
4 terms, yeah.
4 terms in the House, or 1 term in the Senate, 1 term in the House.
Are you worried that in the last year of the service, somebody will have all the right lunches and have all the right appointments with the financial community and line their pockets for their job?
Well, I also have, as part of my proposal, a 10-year ban on lobbying. So, for example, if you have a situation like that where somebody's leaving office, they should not be able to go ahead and profit from that. Go back and get a regular job like everybody else in the country. The
lobbying rule would be important, yeah. Because a lot of the lobbying rule ban would be relevant.
Absolutely, yeah.
A lot of people I know who are in Congress are now lobbyists, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So,
that's interesting stuff. It's kind of a populist message.
It truly is. But again, although I had a, pretty elite job, I grew up right by the steel mills in downtown Gary, and these are people I still see and know. And there were people in my neighborhood that became doctors. One guy became a Hollywood actor. We had a lot.
Who's the actor? Do we know?
Well, yeah, he just recently passed away. He was in a lot of B-type movies. His name was Art LaFleur.
Oh. I kind of remember that name.
Yeah. So he lived on my block. He was probably,
Okay, taxes, because you're a CPA.
Yeah.
They keep the top rate 39% for top income people.
Again, there are hundreds of billions of dollars of garbage out there, special interest type
Loopholes.
things. Yeah, you can call them loopholes. You can call them giveaways. You know, it's crazy. And again, the law is so complex.
So carried interest you eliminate. What about losses? Because Trump and other real estate people can carry losses forward forever.
Well, without getting in the weeds on this, there's a lot of different rules out there that can limit losses.
Right, because traditionally, I guess in the broad picture, I mean, having a huge tax loss is good for you if you lose money on an investment.
It depends.
No, I understand, and this is too much in the weeds, but Patrick Malayter, running for Congress, you put a lot of ideas on the table here that are impressive, and not always in line with the standard ideological talking points, I will say. So thank you very much, and I hope to talk to you again.
I hope you do, too.
Now, it's Patrick M. for FORCongress.com.
Yeah, PatrickM4Congress.com is my website. You should check it out for sure. I also have a YouTube channel with a lot of, thought-provoking videos on there, from the border to, just common sense budget issues.
All right, Patrick Malayter for Congress. Thank you, sir, very much. We'll talk to you soon, I hope. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And welcome back. Now,